To read a novel by Umberto Eco is to enter an enchanted forest, a symbol-drenched, passion-drowned forest that's alive with murmurings, heavy with history and glittering with myth. He writes of mad monks and museums of technology, and in his latest book of night-shrouded cemeteries that are filled with quivering, iniquitous souls. He writes about things we all recognize: lust and greed and love, curiosity, envy. His books may dazzle us with their erudition, but they also are entertainments. They're beguiling. Now, if you're here today, you already know all of this that I've just said, but I hope that after today's session, you're going to know him quite a bit better. So it's my great honor and privilege to ask you to join me in welcoming to Chicago Professor Umberto Eco. Professor, your new novel is, I think, one that contains things that we all recognize. It's seemingly set in the 19th century, but the Prague Cemetery, of course, has things that sound eerily contemporaneous. They are all kinds of conspiracies and cabals and plots that are hatching all over the place. So my question for you is, how in the world did you know this would be happening now?
If I wrote this novel, it was exactly because I believe that it can happen and will happen now and in the future. And when writing, even though I made a lot of research to dive practically into the 19th century and to live in that era, I was continuously aware that I was telling about something around me. And I was always thinking of somebody I knew. And I would like that my reader use this novel as a guide, as a Baedeker, to go around to say, oh, look one Simonini, look one Simonini, look one Simonini. You can do it in Italy, but I think that you can do it also in Chicago or in Washington, or in Paris. Because I have written largely on the function that forgeries have had in the human histories from the beginning. Sometimes even they had a positive function. For instance, inventing marvelous kingdoms, and people went to explore the world in order to find them. The El Dorado myth and so on and so forth, and sometimes having terrible effects is the case of the protocols of the elders of science. So I think that the everyday activity of many politicians, journalists, newspapers, is to produce a fake dossier. Is to give false news. You know, being interested in the problem of languages. I am a semiotician, so I am interested in various forms of communication. I was interested in lying because it's a typical human activity. No, a dog tells always the truth. When a dog barks, means that there is somebody outside. I have never seen a dog who barks in order to cheat me and to say that there was somebody outside. No. So a dog is unable to lie. We lie continuously, even in everyday life. Oh, nice to see you. It's a very polite lie. Okay, you look very well today. We are lying for moral reasons, and we are lying for terrible. So the human life is completely filled up with lies and fake news and so on and so forth. That's the story of my Simonini was obviously an exceptional liar,
but really
a professional liar.
Right, maybe just those of you, the Prague Cemetery is about if you want to just give it maybe a brief synopsis about this character in the 19th century who really, in effect, winds the clocks of all the great conspiracies from the 19th century, including that great forgery, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and other forgeries, and all the bad things that happened in the world in the 19th century could be at this character's feet. And a great part of the novel is his diary and his musings on what he's doing and why, including the great Latin phrase, odi ergo sum, I hate, therefore I am. And that's one of the phrases that struck me, and thinking, boy, that sounds so much like what we hear today. We hear a lot of the motivations for some of the terrible events that are now rocking the world, from economic crises to great political turmoil and terrorism and all the other terrible activities that we think are so new and so unprecedented, of course, have their origin many, many centuries ago. And your other novels, too, of course, deal with conspiracies and the tendency of human beings to not live up to our potential as moral beings.
Yes, well, at least one, the Foucault's Pendulum, but it was in a way different, because it was on the paranoia of the universal conspiracy. So it was a grotesque representation of people who believe or pretend to believe in a general conspiracy. And in this case, Simonini makes real conspiracies, but we have to make a very sharp distinction between a conspiracy and the paranoia of the word conspiracy. Conspiracies exist. In order to kill Julius Caesar, they made a conspiracy. It was discovered the day after, or the same day. Catilina was making a conspiracy. Cicero denounced it in the Senate, and the conspiracy was probably in this moment in Rome as in Washington, people that are making conspiracy, I don't know, to conquer a bank, to change a minister. But the paranoia of general conspiracy, world conspiracy, is there is somebody, and we don't know which one, who in the world is trying to organize everything. It's a sort of occult power who has all the responsibility. We are not responsible. That's why all the dictators used the idea of a general conspiracy in order to not to be criticized, to keep their people united against somebody else. I, as a young boy, having been born in 32, so the first 10 years of my life were under the fascist education. I was educated to hate the conspiracy of the Demo-Pluto-Judo democracies. Democracy, plutocracy, the rich person, and the Jews. That was the world conspiracy. And we were celebrating yesterday in Italy the resignation of Berlusconi, a portentous event by which I read in the newspaper that people in the street was singing Handel's Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Berlusconi lived always speaking of a conspiracy of the judges and all the communists. There are no more communists in this world. You cannot find them. But he was continuing to say, they are there, they are menacing not only me, but you, Italian. So you have to invent the conspiracy. The Jewish conspiracy was on the great element of this paranoia, not only in the 19th century, but one of the documents were the protocols, and they were certainly born in the second half of the 19th century. They were, I say certainly, because the only technical proof we have is that they were published in Russia in 1905. But all the concoction lasted for some decades, let's say from 1860, 1850 to until the end of the century. This uncertainty about their concoction allowed me to invent a fictional story about I could attribute to Simonini many deeds that were certainly accomplished by somebody else, but we do never know exactly who they were.
What? Yes.
Because there were many hands at work.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, when you mentioned there are no more communists in the world, I just recalled a joke I heard recently that the only communists left are on American college campuses, but may be true. I want to ask you, we have such a short time here today, and I wanted to mention too, we're going to be taking questions from the audience in just a couple of minutes after we've finished talking here. And if you do have a question, Professor Eicko would ask if you'd come down front, so make sure he'll be able to hear you. So if you have a question percolating in the back of your mind, just come forward in just a moment when we go to a question session. I wanted to mention, you love lists, long catalogs, long litanies of things in your books. They're filled with these beautiful long lists. And you have a wonderful section.
I have written also a book on lists.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I was going to say, and you talk about the reasons why. And when you pointed that out, I began to think of all the books that do have lists in them that I hadn't really thought of. Moby Dick is filled with long lists, and Colin Harrison's Manhattan Nocturne, long lists, and Tim O'Brien's story, The Things They Carried. They have such power. And I was curious about when did you realize that? When did the list sort of make itself known to you as more than a technique, but a kind of a poetical force?
A long time ago. Now I can tell you, okay, the first paramount example of list is in Homer's Iliad, where is the so-called catalog of ships. And what was the purpose of this list? They were too many. It's impossible to name all of them. So my mouth has no enough tongues to tell of this. Is a poetical topos that returns many times in the history of literature. They have not enough tongues to say. And so the list, being always incomplete, even though very long, must give you the sense of infinity. In this sense, is a beautiful resort, a beautiful literary strategy, just in order to suggest infinity. It's very difficult to suggest infinity without a list. I think that the only one who succeeded was Dante Alighieri at the end of the Paradise, when he watch in God, and in 3 tercets he says everything, without making a list. But is a very exceptional case. I think that I found first the lists, and I became fond of them because I started as a medievalist, and by reading medieval poetry, it was full. It was very. And I remember that when I made at Harvard the Norton Lectures, my first idea was to make them on lists. Then I abandoned the idea for many reasons. And 2 years ago, the Louvre is and was organizing every year in November. They gave the museum to somebody and tell him or her, do what you want. And that year it was mine. And I chose the list, and the museum made concerts, debates, exhibitions, everything on the concept of list. And what had to be the catalog became then a huge book. But so I made not a list of lists.
Right. It's just very powerful, in ways that in reading your work, when you stop, and I always try to read them aloud, thus frightening other people in my home.
This has also this has also a mystical effect. Think in every religion there are litanies, the litanies of the Blessed Virgin, the Rosary, or the Om Mani Padme Om in Buddhism, the repetition of long series of elements that can create sometimes the ecstasies.
Yes,
So the
yes.
list can create the ecstasies. The poetical list was aims only to suggest the possibility of an ecstasy. The religious,
yes.
the liturgical list, on the contrary, would like to produce the ecstasies.
Well, now, I've read that you own 50,000 books. Is it thereabouts?
Yes, but in my apartment in Milan, only 30,000 because there is no more place. I had to move several times and then I stopped. Only 30,000. 30,000 they are, 30,000 must be. So every 6 months I decide which one will be moved to the countryside or to my office at the university or give it. But probably altogether can make 50,000.
And the reason I ask is because I've also read that you believe that the e-book and the question I'm asked most often, anywhere I go, if anyone hears that I write about books, the first question is always, are we even going to have books 10 years from now, 5 years from now? And you have written that you think that the e-book is, and any kind of electronic edition is not necessarily going to displace the traditional book.
No,
is that right?
I don't think so. So, listen, I am in this moment changing some of my ideas about this problem because I was convinced that it's impossible to read peacefully a novel on an e-book. But since in my last trip in October, 20 days, I brought with me 10 or 12 books to read, and so I destroyed my array. This time, I charged on my iPad 20 or 25 novels. And it is a week that I read on the iPad during when I am at bed. It's a little embarrassing because if you move a finger too fast, all the pages shifts away, and with a book, on the contrary, we can do what you want. Okay, but the real problem is a double one. One is the physical, erotical attraction of a paper book. If I find in my cellar a book of my childhood, it has, with the brown of the pages, with traces of my reading, scribbles, I don't know, it has something that appeals to my, make an appeal to my memory. If I find in my cellar a USB, I have no physical emotions. Then there is another problem. I am a book collector, and I have some incunables who have 550 years. You open them, they look as they were printed yesterday with a white paper that we don't have any proof that a diskette can do more than 10 years. We don't have any proofs because in 10 years they changed the kind of computers. The computers who read the floppy disk now then were able only to read the diskette. Then they don't read any longer diskette, but only USB. And so you don't have any proofs that can survive. They can survive blackout. They can survive many other. I read today on the airplane there are those journals full of publicity, typical couches for dogs, electrical couches for dogs, and so electronic nose, marvelous. And there was a fantastic idea. If you have an analogic photograph, pull it in this new and transform it in a digital JPEG, so you save it for your sons and grandchildren. It is the contrary. The analogic photographs on paper has more chances to survive than a JPEG, digital JPEG. So that's a reason. Then I would be very glad if all the books disappeared and all these people would read only in the computer. So my collection of 50,000 books would become as important as the Tutankhamun treasure.
That is certainly true, but you know, it occurred to me when I was reading an article that was about some of your comments on ebooks. I thought, you know, if we only had ebooks, there could be no Name of the Rose. The manuscript could not have. Let's see, could the poison have been put upon the side of a Kindle? I mean, could you? The books have such a literary resonance. Just as you say, they have erotic resonance, they have this tactile resonance, and they have a great literary resonance. I mean, a book is more than just the story, just as you've suggested. And I know that must be true for you.
It's a diary of my reading, too. I make you an example. I am profoundly linked to a history of Middle Age philosophy that I bought in the early 50s and accompanied me making my doctoral dissertations. But every 5 or 10 years I went back, so there are footnotes in black, then other in red, and then other in green. But as every book published in the early 50s, you cannot touch it. It will be dissolved. It would be easy to buy another copy for $10. But that one that counts for me, with all those notes. That is the story of my career, so to speak, is the story of my intellectual growth, is that copy of that book. A new one wouldn't say nothing to me. That's a book. It was a USB, wouldn't have the same impact. It is true that now with an iPad you can also underline pages of a book, but the way of underlining is the same for me and for you. So I don't know if that underlining was yours or mine. It makes an enormous difference.
Yes, there's something about that electronic highlighting that, just as you say, because even highlighting is very specific and individual and eccentric. You know, the way I do it versus someone else.
Because the book was written by somebody else, but after you have read it and you are touched, it becomes also a work of your own. That is an important element of the book. I remember as a collector, I found once a 16th century edition, a copy of a Paracelsus that didn't have a particular value because it was only one volume of a series of 15 volumes. So it's incomplete. But it was completely interwoven with a commentary in German and in Latin of an unknown author in 3 different colors with underlining. So it is a sort of like Merlet, well, as a sort of work of art in making a fabric. That is marvelous. That like it tells me a long story of somebody who was there and left its side, its traces. Okay, that's.
You know, as you said, you of course know the Middle Ages quite well. The medieval world was the subject of your early academic work, and you've written about now the 19th century and the 20th century as well. Does human nature change? Have we changed, or are we progressing at all in a moral sense? I mean, you are uniquely qualified to comment on that because you know the medieval world so well, and you know the contemporary world.
No, I think that the only improvement of our species has been the length of human life, the span of human life. Okay.
That's it.
That is the only improvement of the species. It's not all the certain era were more moral or less moral. The moral values change, and there were centuries in which there were more massacre than today. In the Middle Ages, there was a legend saying that those who went in pilgrimage to a certain church could receive the grace of survive until 40 years. That means that 40 years was already a good achievement for a person. Besides, a cat is happy to live 12, 14 years, so there is no problem. So we have, I am not so stupid to say, oh, this is not an improvement. No, it's a good improvement, an interesting improvement.
But some of the basic things, I mean, that's one of the reasons why reading something like The Name of the Rose, I think, is still such a moving experience for us, because you see the life being different in all the particular ways, all the ways like the way food was gathered, or the way people would sleep, or the way they would the world lit only by fire, as the phrase goes, and yet the same emotions, moved by the same emotions, centuries distant.
Fundamental emotions, yes, are the same, but also the way of producing babies is always the same. Well, we have not changed so much. No, but those explorations on the past, even the experience of reading, have another function. They allow us to live longer. I mean, any illiterate person, it could be savage in the jungle, but it could be also an important political person who has not read any book in his or her life. A literate person, when dying, has lived 70, 60, 80 years, and has the experience of his life. I have lived 10,000 years. I was there when Julius Caesar was assassinated. I was there at the Waterloo battle. I was there with Macbeth. You have, many of us have a lot of it. We have absorbed, so to speak, injected, as they were a drug, the life for a lot of other people. So at the end of our life, we have lived an immensity of years. That's why it's interesting to explore the past and to know how, even by sharing the same fundamental passions than people of today, past people had different ways to elaborate them, to suffer them, that's why education saves people.
Saves people. That's a wonderful, wonderful way to put it. And I was thinking that notion too of literature as enhancing personal longevity. Really into being the ultimate self-help. Yes. We have all these things that we do.
Cultural longevity is as important as the physical one.
Yes, yes. Well, we'll be going to your all's questions. If you would like to ask a question, if you would just move here forward. And while we're waiting, your books are also there's humor. There's humor in your work. You must see the value in it. Obviously, I mean, it's not all just grim and.
Well, probably there's humor even when I want to describe a tragic situation, because, well, that's me. Is my way to see the world. If you don't react to life with humor, you're lost. Never take things too much seriously, especially your own things.
What's the great?
Don't take yourself seriously.
Yes, yes. At the great Horace Walpole line.
The great criminals and the great enemies of the mankind were people who took themselves too seriously.
You hear that said of politicians often, that the ones that take themselves too seriously
Certainly.
are, yeah. That's
Hitler was obviously a person who took himself very seriously, without any shade of humor.
That's a very good point. Yeah, yeah, I thought of it quite that way. And you do, I mean, there is ultimately a kind of a comedy at the bottom of all of it, is there not? I mean, really, with our human aspiration and human, even in the midst, as you say, of great tragedy and great catastrophe, because it is, I mean, we're all going to die, it's all going to be short in the end, and yet we have these aspirations, these immense, profound aspirations.
Yes, but no, maybe I missed the point. But humor is also a sort of medicine against hatred. That in my novel, maybe we have not told that by Simonini is evidently a racist. Okay, he hates everybody, not only Jews, Germans, French, women particularly, and so on and so forth. And hatred is a strange feeling. At the end of the novel, Rachkovsky, the chief of the Tsarist police, makes a sort of apology of hatred. And love is extremely selective. If I love you, I want you to love me. I don't want that you love somebody else. I don't want that somebody else loves you, and so on and so forth. So it restricts the human relation. Hatred is generous. Is warm. It keeps together an entire people against another people. No, that's why it is used by politicians so frequently. They don't call for love. They call for hatred. You must die for fighting against the enemy.
Excellent point.
The
yes.
government never says you have to love each other. Churches say so, not governments.
It's a great tool.
And to love, so it means to lick the leprosy. It's terrible to love. Mother Teresa of Calcutta is repugnant. To hatred, on the contrary, is so comfortable. And the only way to escape the temptation of hating is humor. Even in the small, what I said, we are lying, even when you say, nice to see you. I hate people when the plumbers come to my house, works 2 hours, ask for a certain sum, and he goes and the faucet still drops. I get furious. And then, in humor, if he were intelligent, he would be professor of semiotics at the University of Bologna. And so humor saves you from hating this poor man.
Well put. We have a question?
Yes, it's on a related topic, I think. It's a rather personal question. I'm wondering if you believe in God, and if so, how do you explain evil such as Simonini or Hitler or general evil? Is it perhaps God's sense of humor to make sure that our lives aren't totally boring?
For the second question about evil, you should read St. Augustine, who devoted part of his life to solve the problem of evil. Apropos of God, I don't speak of private questions in public. Anyway, the only thing I am pretty sure, God believes in me.
I really do like that notion of humor being, in effect, a kind of a bulwark against hatred, being almost a technique to keep one from, I guess, maybe being overwhelmed by the negative, and it's really quite a profound notion.
It can be also a protection, like in this case.
Yes, we sensed a bit of that at work. Yes. Why do we read? Why do we read? Yes, the average person. Why do you think they pick up books and read them? I mean, you have this great raging curiosity, But why?
But, you know, the newspapers every season say that young people read less than before, nobody. So I don't understand, because there are, in Europe as in the States, more and more enormous buildings of 3, 4, 5, 7 floors selling books and full of young people browsing them. So what happens? One answer is all these young people populating the books, the skyscrapers like bookstore, as only a 0.000% in comparison to the 7 billion people that live now in our planet, which is absolutely true. But probably when I was a young man, I couldn't enter a bookstore because the bookstore was somber, and the man dressed in black immediately came there. They said, "What do you want?" I was obviously terrorized, and I said, "Oh no, nothing." So probably the percent of young people reading at that time was the same than today, and at that time we were 2 billion instead of 7. So it is obvious that the reading population is always a minority, but it depends. It's a minority in Italy, not in Japan. If you go to the subway in Japan, everybody is reading. Everybody is reading. In the States, they read more than in Italy, for instance. More newspapers, more magazines, more books. They abandon them after they have read them. That is another problem. So I am not so pessimistic about reading. Also because we read in many circumstances. You know, 30 years, 40 years ago, Marshall McLuhan said, "Oh, the Gutenberg galaxy has finished, now only the visual communication." And then he died. If he were there, he should recognize that with the computer, the Gutenberg galaxy had a fantastic rebirth, because in the computer you read. If you are unable to read, you are lost. Computer is not TV. So all these people who is reading the computer, they are readers.
They're readers.
Even though they don't read books. So
Still reading.
I would be very prudent in being so pessimistic and apocalyptic. I would rather ask, what do they read? That's another problem. So what do they do in the computer? They can look in philosophical site or in porno sites. So.
We have another question.
Yes. Well, you're a very, very witty, funny man. You've made us laugh. What makes you laugh?
I lost it.
Oh, she asked. She said, "You have made the audience laugh." So her question was, "What makes you laugh? What sorts of humor appeal to you?"
You know that humor doesn't mean to laugh necessarily. I am unable to give you an answer because since all the philosophers who try to describe laughing, they made a failure. So that I hope for all my life to promise continuously to write a book about laughing, not to do it. So after my death, a lot of people would make doctoral dissertations about my lost theory of laughing. Because laughing is a physical event. We laugh sometimes for despair. The Japanese war prisoners laughed for embarrassment, and the Americans were astonished why they laughed. They laughed because they were embarrassed to be captured. There is a lot of people, especially in America, who used to laugh during the striptease. another kind of laughing for embarrassment, especially if there was the wife aside, in order to Italians didn't laugh during the striptease like this. So we laugh for many reasons. Sometimes because we are happy, but not necessarily we laugh for a comic situation. And in the case of humor, you don't laugh. You smile, which is a different attitude. So you laugh if a general stepping down from the Pantheon stumbles, that is a laughing situation. We don't laugh if the accident happens to an old lady. On the contrary, you have a movement of pity. And you smile if the old lady disguises herself as a girl. This is the essay of Pirandello on humor, a beautiful essay. I repeat, if the general stumbles, you laugh. If the old lady stumbles, you don't laugh. If the old lady believes to be still a girl and disguises herself, you smile. That's humorous observation. And these humorous observation mixed with understanding, distance, piety, and a little sarcasm is a mixed situation.
Right.
So I am unable to answer you, ma'am.
We have
Professor Eicko, I'm curious as to how your experiences as a young child growing up in fascist Italy inspired your literary career.
As a young child?
Yes, growing up in fascist Italy, he asked how that influenced you.
Obviously, because first of all, you have the marvelous epiphany to experience in overnight the complete pivoting of the world. I mean, Mussolini fell down for the first time in July 43. Then he came back in September, but for the first time, the fascism formally. And I was 11 years old. And I was, until that moment, educated according to the criteria of the dictatorship. I was astonished by this sudden change of the story. The day after, my mother sent me to the newsstand to see if by chance there were the newspaper, because it was possible that with that earthquake, not even the newspaper were published. And I found that the old newspapers were no more there. Only the new one with new titles, and one was of the Christian Democrats, the other one of the Liberal Party, the other one of the Socialist Party, the other one of the Communist Party. And so I was not so stupid to think that all those things grew up overnight. Obviously, they were there somewhere before. And suddenly I understood what a dictatorship was. It kept covered and compressed all those things that existed but were invisible, or in fact they were exiled in other countries. And I understand what a new and different world in one day. So all the analysis I was able to make of what had happened to me in the previous 10 years shaped my way of thinking and of judging the historical events and so on and so forth. Probably it's because of that experience that I wrote that book too.
I would be interested why they didn't translate your manual for writing diploma thesis into English, but that's not a question for you. So for you, I would have question, Island of the Day Before, Theory of Errors. What was your source? of knowledge on that.
My source of knowledge.
Your source.
Your source of knowledge on the theory of errors in the island of the day before. That's it.
The theory of?
Errors.
Of?
Errors. Theory of error, statistics.
The deadline? No, I missed the last word.
The theory of mistakes, the theory
errors.
of errors.
You mentioned the island of the day before,
Yeah.
isn't it? And where there was the question of the deadline, dateline, but the theory of?
The errors cancelling themselves. For
Errors canceling themselves?
I don't understand.
I'm not sure I understand. You mean
Yes, the errori, but I don't remember to have spoken of a theory of errors in the island the day before. I understood the word, but I don't remember the place. But let me first answer your first question. Why I did publish in English you know, because it was a book how to make a doctoral dissertation. It was designed on the situation of Italy at the time, in which there was a doctoral dissertation, not at the time of PhD in America, but after the 4 years of BA. After the 4 years of BA in Italy, there was a doctoral dissertation that, when it was well made, it was like a PhD dissertation. So my book was aiming at that kind. So in the Anglo-Saxon country, the story was different. So I always asked not to translate this book, and it was translated against my will in many other countries. Also because at that time I also tried to explain how to typewriting the dissertation. Then there was the computer. They're still selling my book with the instruction of how typewriter it. And I think that for a young generation who had never seen a typewriter, it is like I were a spy. As for the second question, would you tell something more about that?
there are only...
If you had to explain an innocent person what
I hope
is
that
the theory
I don't
of
confuse the book, but there are all these clocks on the vessel. Or these clocks used for determining...
yes,
Yeah?
sure.
Longitude, right? Am I right? Or,
You mean the
And
errors
then-
in the calculation of
Yes, the calculation.
time lapse?
yeah, and then the point is that it is a theory of errors, secret thing which they try to spy on them. And so I would like to know, where do you know about it?
There is a lot of literature about that. But the curious story is that the same year my novel appeared, there was published a book by Dava Sobel on the affairs of longitudes, in which all those things are very well explained. More or less as I did in my novel, simply we were resorting to the same sources. And I remember then we met and we laughed. You know, sometimes you laugh. Because we gave the impression of having to have copied each other. We published the book at the same moment. So it's a very complicated story, okay? And I repeat, the Dava Sobel book is like that, but on the problem of longitudes, there are books like that. But I suggest you go on Google, call for longitudes, and for timekeepers, longitudes, then selection, timekeepers, and you find a lot of elements.
I apologize. I kept thinking you were saying Eros. That's why I didn't jump in, because I thought I might end up inadvertently. We have another question.
You have described the sensations the erotic sensations that you get when you're reading a book and you're able to write and all those things. I was wondering, what kind of an effect does the electronic media have on your writing, on the creative process?
I think that we can evaluate the effect of the electronic writing in the next 50 or 100 years. I have the impression, for instance, it will affect the syntax. There is always a certain difficulty in translating from Latin languages into Anglo-Saxon languages because the Latin languages are abundantly syntactic. I say something that in spite of that, instead of, therefore, while the Anglo-Saxon discourse is hypotactic. They put together many assertions, and you must make the effect, cause, and consequence. So it's very difficult to translate. When writing in electronically, it happens to you to cut and paste and to move your blocks. And by moving a block, if the block starts with instead of, it cannot work in the new position. So you try to eliminate those instead, notwithstanding, in spite, therefore. That will change the style of the Latin languages, the consecutio temporum. To what an extent, we don't know. It's such a short span of time, 30 years, more or less. So we don't know. It will influence the freedom of writing, because contrary to the stupid common opinion is always stupid, obviously. If not, it wouldn't be common. The machine doesn't eliminate inspiration. On the contrary, it helps, because while in order to write with a pen, your imagination is stopped by the resistance of the matter, with the computer it follows the rapidity of your brain. Then you have all the time to correct. So you can also to make mistakes. You know? Right. So you go more, you go faster, and it can, as it were a sort of surrealistic automatic writing. But seems the common opinion. There was a critic that said on my Foucault's Pendulum, it is evident that it is a book conceived on the computer. Because one of my characters writes on the computer, but if a character writes on the computer, doesn't mean that the book is conceived on the computer. In the same sense in which if Raskolnikov is a murderer, doesn't mean that Dostoevsky was a murderer. But because people identify characters and author, and so it's evident that the book was conceived by the computer, except the last episode, the trumpet in the cemetery. That's his poetry, and it's seen that it was written by hand. Now, all the book was written even by hand, except the scene of the cemetery that was written entirely the computer. Because I thought of it so many times before that when I arrived to that point, I was like Rubinstein at the piano. I played it without any hesitation, and I didn't correct it. It came this way. So you see how the electronic writing can change the so-called inspiration, felicity of writing, and many other things.
Let's, we have time for one more question, and then Professor Eicko will be signing his books afterward. copies of the Prague Cemetery, and you're welcome to come and have your book signed. Yes?
I would be interested if you could talk a little bit about how your work in semiotics, the relationship between that work and your fiction writing. How do each play into each other?
I believe that they had no connection. So I believe to be a scholar working 5 days per week in the university and writing novels on the weekends. But the readers and the critics found many connections, which means that I was not schizophrenic. There was a connection. Since it's always difficult to make a judgment about one's own activity, I can give you an element. There is a series in America called The Library of Living Philosophers, who started 50 years ago with John Dewey, Bertrand Russell, and since things decline, now I am the last one. And I have to finish the job before my death because it's the Library of Living Philosophers. And the books, there are 1,000 pages. Books consist of 100 pages written by the thinker, sort of philosophical autobiography, and 25 essays written by different people to whom you are supposed to answer. So I'm terrified by this terrible perspective. And the editors of the series decided that the 25 essays in the book of the Library of Living Philosophers had to be not only about my academic work, but also about my novels, seen as a contribution to philosophical and semiotical questions. Okay, that's that.
Thank you all very much.